Welcome to today's webinar, Managing Fatigue in the Workplace. During today's presentation, attendees, you will be in a listen-only mode. If you have any questions relating to today's topic, you can email them to Emily at any time. Her address will be found on the slide now on the screen and at the end of the presentation. It's emily.whitcomb@nsc.org. Should you have any technical difficulties, you may contact our help desk, and that number is 877-297-2901. So now I'll turn things over to Emily. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today to talk about managing fatigue in the workplace. My name is Emily Whitcomb, and I'm the Program Manager here at the National Safety Council, and I head our Fatigue Initiative. Also presenting today is Kevin Gregory. He is our fatigue advisor and subject matter expert. If you're not familiar with the National Safety Council, we are a 100-year-old nonprofit that works to eliminate preventable deaths at work, in homes and communities, and on the road through leadership, research, education, and advocacy. We launched our Fatigue Initiative in July of 2016, and we've been diligently working on creating educational materials for employers to learn about fatigue and developing resources to employers to manage fatigue in their workplace. At the end of the webinar, I'll share some of those upcoming projects we have for you. Today, we want to share some of the causes of fatigue in the workplace, talk about some specific risk factors of fatigue, and then Kevin will share some of the best practices to managing fatigue in the workplace. Fatigue describes feelings of tiredness, sleepiness, reduced energy, and increased effort needed to perform tasks at a desired level. We've all felt it, the tiredness, sleepiness, that reduced energy. No one is immune to fatigue, but many don't realize just how much fatigue affects our performance and our safety. So we're going to talk about some of the causes and effects of fatigue in the workplace, and I'm actually going to start by talking about the effects first. So in the short term, fatigue causes decreases in our cognitive performance, which leads to decreases in our job and our safety performance. And in the long term, it leads to economic and health consequences. So extensive research has shown that fatigue causes decrease in cognitive performance, including decreased vigilance, memory concentration, reaction time, impulse control, alertness, and on and on. So basically, we're just not able to think clearly or perform as well when we're tired. Many studies actually compare your performance when you're fatigued to your performance when you're intoxicated. One study showed that your performance after being awake for more than 20 hours is similar to your performance when you have a 0.08 blood alcohol concentration. So this is interesting to consider if you have employees who are on heavy machinery or doing safety critical tasks and they're on their 12th hour into their shift, and what effect those long hours and those long days have on their performance. So would you want an employee working while drunk? Probably not. So why is it okay to have an employee working when they're extremely fatigued? So all of these cognitive performance delays that we discussed, the decreased vigilance, attention, memory performance, they accumulate and cause decreases in our overall performance. So work performance, including productivity, decreases as employees become fatigued. Safety performance also decreases as employees become fatigued. So in fact, one study found up to a 6% decrease in productivity for employees with sleep disorders. This productivity actually added up to costing employers thousands of dollars per year per employee. A recent AAA Foundation study found that driving after sleeping only 4 to 5 hours has a similar crash risk as driving while legally intoxicated. That's 4 times the crash risk as someone who had slept the recommended 7 hours a day. Another study found that approximately 13% of work injuries could be attributed to sleep problems. Again, people just don't perform as well when they're tired. This results in decreased productivity and increased safety risks. In the long term, tired employees are less productive, more expensive, and more likely to make critical mistakes, such as damaging expensive equipment or getting injured. And studies have shown that fatigue negatively impacts your health in the long term as well. An employee with an untreated sleep disorder can cost an employee up to $3,000 per year in decreased productivity costs. And people who are chronically sleep deprived are more likely to have health problems, including depression, obesity, cardiovascular disease, a host of chronic diseases, and even reproductive issues. So what causes fatigue in the workplace? There's really three overarching physiological causes to fatigue in the workplace. There's sleep deprivation, circadian rhythm misalignment, and time on task fatigue. And we'll dive into each of these a little bit. So sleep deprivation is probably the largest contributor to fatigue, and it really has two components: lack of sleep and time of wake. Experts recommend that adults get 7 to 9 hours of sleep every day for optimal performance. But what studies have shown are that more than 37% of the U.S. workforce is not getting those 7 hours of sleep, and they're likely sleep deprived as a result. So in our culture, we're just not making sleep a priority. It's often seen as a badge of honor to work on very little sleep, and sleep is usually the first thing that gets cut when you have a very busy day. But employers need to be sure that employees have the knowledge, the resources, and the time to get adequate sleep in order to be happy, healthy, and safe employees. And we'll talk about today about how to get better sleep and to empower our employees. So one of those factors is sleep disorders. So sleep disorders can be a huge barrier to getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep a day. Sleep apnea and insomnia are just some of the most common sleep disorders, and some estimate that up to 20% of the population may suffer from these two sleep disorders. And many don't realize that they have a sleep disorder, and treatment is often pretty easy. What people may not realize is that sleep deprivation and the negative consequences that happen from sleep deprivation occur far more frequently than most people realize. So this study showed that participants who lost 2 hours of sleep over 10 days performed the same as someone who was awake for 24 hours. Many people have the perception that losing an entire night's sleep will have huge impacts on your ability to function, but studies show that losing just a few hours of sleep or a series of days can produce the same results. Time awake is just as critical as amount of sleep. When you wake up, your energy levels immediately start draining, and as your day progresses, your biological need for sleep increases. At 16 hours, your performance starts to degrade. Many people don't think about lack of sleep or sleep deprivation in this way. When an employee works a 12 or 14-hour shift, consider what time they needed to wake up to get ready and drive into work. And after the shift, they may need time to take care of personal responsibilities, and this could mean that they are on the roads driving drowsy. Another cause of fatigue is our circadian rhythm. Humans are biologically programmed to be sleepy at night and alert during the day. The natural release of chemicals such as melatonin at night help keep our natural sleep patterns. Being awake during the period of midnight to 6 a.m. is linked to increased sleepiness and an increased risk of errors. Being alert during the night is very difficult for us. It goes against our very physiology. So I have an infographic to share. This is available on our website, and it's a great illustration of our circadian rhythm. It's based on someone who works a traditional day shift. Circadian rhythm is shown on the left, and daily activities are shown on the right. And this infographic compares the juxtaposition of a day shifter schedule to their circadian rhythm. At 6 a.m., many people are waking up, getting ready for work, maybe they're exercising, but at 6 a.m. our circadian rhythm is still in sleep mode and is still pumping out melatonin. Then at 7 a.m. you might be driving it to work while your body is just starting to come out of that sleep mode. And if we fast forward, at 10 p.m., your body starts secreting melatonin to put you to sleep. But many people are still finishing up chores. Maybe they're playing on their smartphone, tending to babies, or putting their toddlers back in bed for the 4th time that night. So for day shifters, this infographic demonstrates the misalignment between what our bodies are, when our bodies are naturally alert versus sleeping, versus what our daily schedule demands of us. But imagine working a night shift and the effects of this misalignment of your circadian rhythm if you're starting your shift in the dark and you're expected to remain awake and vigilant until 6 a.m. And then you have to drive home exhausted and crawl into bed when the sun starts, is beating down and your family is starting getting ready for their days. Another cause of fatigue is time on task fatigue, and there's really two aspects to this. There's tedious tasks and there's mentally demanding tasks. So the longer an employee performs a tedious task, the more his or her attention, speed, and accuracy will decline. One example of this is highway hypnosis that you experience when you're driving for a long period of time on a boring highway. On the opposite end of the tedious tasks are the mentally demanding tasks that also introduce fatigue. We're just not designed to maintain high levels of vigilance over long periods of time. So to compare this to another driving example, this would be similar to driving in a busy city for a long period of time and having to remain vigilant throughout that entire driving experience. It's important to note here that time on task fatigue can be compounded. So for example, if a worker is on the night shift and they're doing a tedious task for a long period of time, it often introduces a lot of fatigue. So let's talk about some organizational and job factors that can contribute to fatigue. How an organization is managed and its operations can have a huge effect on an employer's fatigue. The organizational culture, especially their safety culture, can play a big role. So one good example is shift scheduling practices. The shift length, overtime practices, the length of shift returns or the amount of time they have off between the shifts, shift rotation practices. These are just a few examples of organizational and job factors that can affect fatigue. So I have another infographic to show you. This looks at the riskiest work schedules. So the most at-risk group are shift workers. Shift work often creates the perfect storm of sleep deprivation, circadian disruption, and time on task fatigue. Organizational and job factors also play a role here. Many times these fatigue factors build on one another, just how we discussed with time on task fatigue. So safety incidents are 30% higher during the night shift, and this is likely due to a few factors. First, we have circadian rhythm misalignment. Those on night shift have to remain alert and vigilant as their bodies are pumping out that melatonin that's trying to induce sleep. Second, sleep deprivation is a big cause of fatigue for night shift workers because they often find it difficult to get rest during the days. And then there's also job factors that can introduce those time on task fatigue if they're doing tedious tasks or maybe long, mentally demanding tasks. Employees with early start time are also at risk of fatigue because they're forced to wake up very early when their body is still producing that melatonin. So they often suffer from both sleep deprivation and circadian rhythm misalignment. Employees who work long hours are at risk because they may not be getting the downtime that they need to commute to and from work, to take care of their responsibilities, to get enough sleep, and then commute back. So these long hours can also introduce some time on task fatigue. Irregular shifts refers to shifts that are unpredictable and can change frequently, while rotating shifts rotate on a predictable schedule. So this could involve 2 weeks on a day shift, shifting to 2 weeks on a night shift, and then 2 weeks on the next morning shift. So some people believe that rotating shift employees might be at the highest risk of fatigue. That's because employees on rotating shifts often have trouble adapting their sleep schedules and their body clocks to this irregular sleep schedule. So they often aren't able to get steady bedtime habits, and that can often disrupt their sleep schedule. So now we're going to talk about some specific risk factors that can cause fatigue in the workplace. So it's important to note that it's nearly impossible to eliminate fatigue. It's just a function of being human. The second we wake up, our fatigue begins to accumulate. But we can identify the factors that contribute to fatigue and situations where there's a higher likelihood for fatigue-related risk. And then we can learn how to best manage those risk factors, which Kevin's going to talk about in just a bit. So these risk factors can increase an employee's risk of fatigue and fatigue-related risk But this isn't an exhaustive list. And these risk factors are often complex and complicated, but I want to give you an understanding of the risk factors that could increase fatigue and fatigue risk. So type of shift refers to if they're on a night shift or a day shift, and we just talked about the night shift is often a little more risky. The shift length can be a risk factor for fatigue. The longer the shift, the more risk there is for fatigue. The hours worked in a week, when you get working over 50 hours and into that overtime, you're going to be introducing fatigue. The number of rest breaks an employee gets during the day can affect their fatigue level and their ability to manage and mitigate some of that fatigue. The type of job they do can introduce fatigue if they're doing some tedious tasks over a long period of time or if they're doing mentally demanding tasks. The number of hours off they have between shifts can be a risk factor for fatigue. If they have a quick return, maybe 8 hours or less, they're not able to get the amount of sleep they need between their shifts. A person's commute length can affect their fatigue levels. If they are commuting 2 hours a day, that's 2 hours less they have to take care of those responsibilities and to get their sleep. And then obviously the amount of sleep you get is going to be a risk factor for fatigue. So all right, the last portion of our webinar, we're going to talk about best practices in managing fatigue, and I'm going to hand the mic over to my partner, Kevin Gregory. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Emily. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. And just let me get control here. So in regards to managing the issue, I think as Emily's described thus far, there is a physiological basis for fatigue. So it's critical to recognize that and try to address that. So we all have a need for sleep that is essential for our health and well-being. In addition, our body clocks or circadian rhythms program us for periods of sleepiness and wakefulness and a range of other factors on a daily basis, such that when we lose sleep, it affects all aspects of physical and mental functioning, which unfortunately lead to increased risks due to fatigue, both on and off the job. And as Emily mentioned, this last bullet's really a critical takeaway that a number of studies have shown that individuals are not able to reliably recognize how alert or fatigued they are when they're in a sleep loss situation. So they don't recognize how alert, how competent, or how safe they are. And also one of the first steps in managing this issue is overcoming some of the common myths, such that tired people are simply lazy or lacking in motivation, or as we just mentioned, people not being reliably able to tell when they're fatigued. Oftentimes we're kind of in a denial mode, thinking that it doesn't affect me. We've had situations where we've been sleep deprived in the past and we've done fine. So sometimes this leads to complications. And also, as Emily mentioned earlier, this is really important to recognize that this is something that can't be eliminated. It's a complex physiological issue. So really it's about managing and minimizing the associated risks. So there are no simple, single, or simple solutions as far as managing this. So best practices for managing fatigue should include multiple activities, given that it's this complex issue. And I'll talk about each of these in the following slides. The idea of providing education and training, having policies and practices that are based on good science, countermeasures or what we call strategies or tools that allow people to try to manage this issue. Also think about monitoring or reporting capabilities that can help an organization evaluate how big of a risk this is in their operation. And also shared responsibilities. It's individuals and organizations need to work together on this. And finally, of course, as you develop activities or a program, coming up with update or improvement processes. And this works best as a cohesive program, but that may not always be practical for organizations. Sometimes I think people maybe will take on individual aspects of a program and see how that goes before they kind of add to it. So as far as education, this can be simple and basic, or depending on resources, more in-depth and targeted, especially depending on the operation as well, how significant perhaps the issue may be. At a fundamental level, it should increase or raise awareness of the significance of this issue. I think some situations I've worked with, you find that people they provide some education and they feel that it just raises the awareness that this is something people should take more seriously, and that they find a benefit in that. Now, Emily kind of described some of the issues with sleep and the body clock, circadian rhythms. So, education should really talk about these fundamentals. Even though everyone sleeps, generally people know very little about what the actual process of sleep is like, what their sleep need is on an individual basis, as this can vary. Some people are short sleepers, some people are long sleepers. The different functioning and benefits to the different stages of sleep. And then, of course, what factors affect sleep, things like age and alcohol. And then finally, Emily also mentioned sleep disorders. There's up to 90 known sleep disorders, and these often people are unaware that they have this problem, but they can be effectively diagnosed and treated for the most part. Of course, along with the need for sleep, just understanding the basics of our circadian rhythms, the timing of the body clock, the causes and effects when the body clock is disrupted, and also, as Emily noted, this issue with long hours of wakefulness, how that can affect performance and safety. And of course, when we lose sleep and body clock is disrupted, what are the effects of sleep loss and fatigue? Just so, recognizing these issues. Also understanding that individuals are different, which, adds to the complexity of managing this. People have different sleep needs. Some people are morning people, some people are evening people, night owls. People have different levels of tolerance to fatigue. There's a lot of research that's going on in this area, finding out that some people are more, working the same schedule. One person can be doing fine and someone else can be struggling quite significantly. And also, talking about strategies or tools or what we call countermeasures that are scientifically proven to benefit alertness and better sleep. Of course, just about everyone uses caffeine, but understanding dosage levels and the appropriate timing, using it strategically is kind of one of the common themes that we often talk to groups about. Napping strategies, another one, can be very beneficial. How long the nap is, the time of day of the nap. Also, light is a significant factor that affects our body clock. So there are benefits to light, times you want to get light, also times you want to avoid light, such as coming off the night shift, wanting to minimize your exposure to light, such as someone can get home and get to sleep more easily after working the night shift. Also, exercise, activity, diet, these things are all important for just a healthy lifestyle. And I think diet, in one thing, you'll see lots of stories often in the news about different diet things that can help with sleep or help with your alertness. And unfortunately, there's probably some positives to that, but generally the science is not very strong as far as the merits of different diet manipulations. So that's, again, something to understand better. And of course, medications, there are a number of medications that help with sleep, both prescriptive and over-the-counter. So understanding the positives and negatives of those medications is important. So really the goal of a good educational activity or program is really to help individuals develop a personal plan, such we're talking about, that people are different as far as how fatigue affects them. So helping them develop a personal plan. It really can also be very helpful to include a kind of outreach to families beyond just the workers themselves, but including families and helping individuals, especially when they're working challenging schedules, such as those that Emily was describing earlier, helping them manage their time away from work such that they're getting the rest they need to be safe and perform well on the job. Now also, the idea that this shouldn't just be a one-time thing. really it's something should be an ongoing activity. There can be initial activities as well as recurrent. And of course, this can take on varying types of approaches. It can be simple or more involved. It can be posters and break rooms. It can be actual organized noontime wellness, health and wellness kind of sessions. So it can take on a variety of forms. Now, next, let me touch on the idea of science-based policies and practices. And generally, people sometimes often ask, well, is there a specific number of hours someone should work? What's the best schedule? Unfortunately, there isn't one hard and fast rule on this. But generally, we can get some guidance as far as Emily was talking about, number of hours of wakefulness can be a critical factor. So where the timing of the shift is within a daytime. So it really depends on the specifics of the operation of the work that someone is doing, what their workload is like at different times. Not only on a daily basis, but also recognizing on a weekly basis, there can be a cumulative effect, and generally the idea that we get, work a typical 5-day work week and have a couple days off is kind of allows someone perhaps for a recovery on the weekend from potential sleep debt over the week. Off-duty periods, really the critical, time between your work shifts should allow for this 8-hour sleep opportunity, even though, people are a little bit different, generally targeting that time as well as some other time for personal activities is important. And also recognizing that the timing of this time off can be important as well. The ability for someone to sleep at night is different than their ability to sleep during the morning or daytime hours. Now, as I talked about weekends just a moment ago, so there should be kind of regular recovery periods following periods of work, such that generally when we build up a sleep debt, you need a couple of good nights of sleep generally to recover from that lost sleep. Now, we also need to recognize different time of day effects. A lot of focus goes on night shifts accordingly, but also sometimes it's just early morning start times. Work shifts that start at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning. If you think about when people back that up, when people need to wake up for that, that can have some, there's some interesting studies showing effects from that. Also thinking about, in some organizations, think about different shift lengths based on the timing. They may have a different day shift limit versus a night shift limit. So that's kind of one potential approach to trying to manage the increased risks that go along with these off-hour work shifts. There's also the idea, so this should be shared responsibilities. There's kind of this concept, what they call fit for duty, that's taking hold in a number of industries. The idea that employees should show up for work rested and fit for duty. Now, also, there should be provisions for non-standard situations that occur from time to time in all operations. For instance, allowing for, what emergency situations, what are the policies going to be for how long people can work when there's an emergency situation and they need to work extended hours? Are there limits on overtime? Sometimes projects I've worked on find that certain people like to work overtime. Well, it's good for their individual interests, but there can be increased risk when people are working too many hours. Also practice, when you need to call in people to handle some, again, an emergency situation or something, there should be specific practices that manage that as well. And then also when people are working extended hours, overtime, etc., there should be what we call compensatory rest. So maybe they typically get 2 days off or they get 12 hours off between shifts. Oftentimes practices to manage this include extended rest periods in those situations. When I talk about countermeasures, it's this idea that there are strategies or tools that people can use to manage fatigue or maintain their alertness and performance. Obviously, having these readily available at the work site is important. The workforce should be able to apply and use these easily. One situation, I remember that a work site put in a new break room, but they put it in an unusual location such that it wasn't that convenient for people to get to. So sometimes these things need to be thought out fully. Also, there can be a variety of environmental factors such as lighting and temperature control, ventilation and such that can have effects on fatigue. So if you're able to incorporate those into work area designs. Break rooms, another one. There's good studies showing that a certain kind of lighting in the break room can be very helpful for people when they're in there for a 30-minute break or something. That lighting can provide a little boost to their alertness. Of course, that can also depend on time of day. When people are working night shifts, we need to think about application of lighting at different times, as that can affect their body clock. Also, where applicable, in some situations, people are able to, or organizations are able to put in rest facilities, a little nap room kind of situation. These can be very helpful. Of course, then there need to be appropriate policies that go along with their use. And also, when new things are added, or just in general, perhaps getting feedback on the use and effectiveness of the different strategies that are available on our work site can be helpful going forward, figuring out whether to improve things or change things up. So now, a formal fatigue management program, or you may have heard the term FRMS, Fatigue Risk Management System. The concept here is that these are science-driven approaches, but even simple activities can benefit from the basic principle that you can't manage what you don't measure. So coming up with ways, most organizations have a variety of data and such that they collect from their operations. One such may be certain industry practices that can allow for benchmarks for comparisons and such. Generally establishing reporting criteria and mechanisms in regards to fatigue is a really important first stop. In general, just safety and performance measures that are available in many organizations can be something that can be monitored with an eye towards potential fatigue effects. And of course, the next one's really critical, and most places have investigation processes for incidents and accidents, but also including, time of day effects potentially, the number, how many work days someone has been working, how many hours they're awake. These are important to include, whether to rule in or rule out the idea that fatigue may have been a factor in a certain incident or accident. This is very important. And unfortunately, sometimes the data is lacking because this information isn't captured in many places. In addition, you can consider additional activities, something with a little more effort, perhaps even surveying employees and trying to gather some information from them about some of the issues that they encounter on the job can be another way to gather that important information and then come up with a plan to try to manage it. So I want to provide next, just kind of give you an example of a tool that is used in some work sites. Risk assessment, I think, is a concept most people are aware of. And so if you have an existing form, the idea is develop or incorporate fatigue factors into what you're already doing. And here the general idea is here to kind of look at some of the factors we've already been talking about. How long a shift is, how many hours someone's been awake, what's the time on task or workload like, how many days in a row or nights in a row someone has been working. Is the work schedule changing? Is it a rotating shift kind of situation? Are rest periods not satisfactorily long? Are they short? So it's looking at these different factors and then kind of assigning a risk level. It can be as simple as just something that's considered low, moderate, or high. We also want to think about time of day issues, the start times for shifts, whether the shift is during that midnight to 6 a.m. window that Emily was talking about earlier. Is the shift timing consistent, or is it rotating around the clock? Of course, there are a variety of other factors that come onto it. When fatigue is an issue, like when the NTSB investigates something you may see in the news with a plane crash or a truck crash or something, it isn't just one thing that they will find. It's often a combination of factors, such as other things like other stressors, adverse environmental conditions can also contribute to some of the underlying sleep loss or body clock, circadian rhythm issues. Also, long commutes are becoming an increasing factor, I think, in a lot of metropolitan areas, as well as individuals are different, so there's going to be different issues that come into play. It can be other health issues or a variety of things that can come in there. So this idea of shared responsibilities is that it's, both the organization and individual employees need to work together on this to get the best solution. In an organizational sense, really having clearly defined roles and responsibilities is really critical. At a number of projects that I've worked on over the years, I find it's really helpful when someone in the organization kind of takes on what I refer to as the fatigue champion. There can be an individual who really sees the value in this issue, and they kind of help drive activities that improve it. It's one thing to have someone come in from the outside and perhaps try to give some guidance, but really to have someone internally who really champions the issue can be really critical to its success. Obviously, there's this idea of just culture, such that when people report issues with fatigue, that it's a non-punitive situation, that they can feel comfortable reporting if they're having issues with a certain work schedule. And really it's this idea that we need to, you set up these policies and practices and say you're going to be addressing this issue, it's really about walking that walk, not just talking the talk. And of course on the personal level, people need this fit for duty idea. They need to show up rested for work, use their time off for work to be ready to work, get their rest where they need it. They also need to recognize, personal limitations. These are different for different people, as I've mentioned before. And again, going along with this this just culture, they should be able to report issues to try to help improve the situation, bottom line. And also some situations, even though people are poor at recognizing how fatigued they are, but sometimes this buddy system can be a simple positive in that people are looking out for each other. Recognizing perhaps when someone maybe needs a break or something like that. And that's sometimes a manager's role, but sometimes just people that you're working with recognizing maybe someone's a little off that day and they need a little extra help. Now finally, just as you develop activities or develop a program, if that's what it takes, recognizing that there should be improvement processes. As you gather information, reporting, monitoring data, evaluating it, looking for trends or particular issues that crop up. I'm a data guy by training, so I think that you can find value in getting information, and it may reveal things that you're not aware of. Also, as I mentioned earlier, including fatigue factors in the review and investigation of incidents and accidents can be very important. Looking for those unfortunate situations that can happen and recognize whether or not there's some specific fatigue factor that's contributing to these, especially if it's on a more ongoing or habitual basis. So through these, you want to look for trends, specific hazards that may exist in an operation, and look for, based on those, then think about what ways are to reduce these risks, minimize these risks. So obviously gathering information, applying lessons learned, these things can be then wrapped back into educational activities that may be ongoing. That can be a very effective way. You get information and then feed that back to the employees about some of the things that you're seeing in the operation as you try to manage this issue. And just generally looking for regularly monitoring the activities that are going on, auditing it, looking for the things that are working well or the things that could be improved, or perhaps potential things that you could add on to it as you move forward. As the program, as the activities mature, then these other things can be added to that as people become more accustomed to dealing with this issue. So I'll hand it back to Emily. Thank you for your time. I'll hand it back to Emily for the closing here.
Thanks, Kevin. So I want to share some upcoming activities that we have. First, over the next year, we're going to be releasing a series of reports that's based on 2 national surveys we've conducted on workplace fatigue. The first report in this multi-part series will look at the causes and consequences of employee fatigue. We'll dive into those risk factors that we discussed earlier and also talk about employee sleep health. This first report will be released on June 21st. We are also working on developing a fatigue cost calculator. The cost calculator will provide a tailored cost estimate for how much fatigue is costing your operations. We hope to release the cost calculator at our Congress and Expo this September. We're also working on creating more educational materials, including white papers, fact sheets, more infographics, just more materials to provide you with more information. And these can all be found on our website. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to email me. I'd love to hear from you. I also want to let you know that we'll be posting a recorded version of this webinar up on our website. Hopefully we can get that up by the end of the week. Thank you for joining us today. Again, please send me any questions or comments you may have to my email, and I hope everyone has a safe day. Thank you.
Thank you everybody for joining us for this webinar, and we do appreciate your attention and participation in today's event. Again, thanks so much and have a great day everybody.